Welcome back to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here, joined by Melissa Griffith. Melissa, how are you today?
I am doing great. I've decided something recently. I'm living my authentic voice. So I'm nothing but authenticity today and honesty coming out of me.
Wow, that's exciting. I feel privileged
as opposed to
be
last week.
Well, there's always last week, but yeah, we have an interesting topic coming up this episode here, this conversation here. There's some research that was dropped within the last week or so by Coursera, second year running. We talked about it last year. I think, Melissa, you brought it to our attention last year. Coursera is releasing what they're calling their Global Skills Index. They did it in 2019, the inaugural one, and now they liked it so much, and I think they appreciated our podcast so much, they decided to do it again in 2020. And obviously, anything in 2020 has to take into account how the world has changed. So there's a good deal of information about the response to COVID and how that's impacted how people are using Coursera and how they think about their skill development. But it's an interesting thing. It's like the Meeker report. It's like the Gartner hype cycle. Like, we like to look at these yearly trend reports to see how things change over time. What are your thoughts? Just the high level. What are you thinking here?
High level. So we must have covered this last year too. I think this is a good report, right? Coursera is holding in on something that we've talked about for a long time. I think most people in education realize, which is the intersection between colleges and universities, employers and companies and learners is skills, right? And as education evolves, we're going to go more from just talking about this is the degree I have in medical or in pre-med, or this is the degree I have in computer science, to more what are the tangible skills that you have, because the rate of what skills you need is evolving. One of the discussions we're talking about is, especially in technology, new skills, the shelf life is about 2 years. And so this is something that's going to become increasingly more important. So I don't necessarily think this report has gotten it completely right now, but it's a definitely good start. And being able to keep track of skills, and not only these skills, right now they are very much focused on three broad categories of data, technology, and business. But being able to really keep track of what skills are you merged in and what areas are you merging over time is going to be super important, because I think 10 years from now, if we're still doing this podcast, it's going to be very different what we're going to be talking about as the skills that are needed in the future.
Yeah, and they do genuinely come at it with a global perspective, which I also think is interesting, because one thing that we may fall prey to a bit on this show is a hyper focus on the US and North America, not necessarily understanding the macro trends. And what's interesting about platforms like Coursera is that they provide real access opportunities to the best skill-based content, upskilling materials for folks really around the world. Although, as we were talking, coming into this, I think the way in which different parts of the world use platforms like Coursera will then influence the kind of data that Coursera is capturing. There in the US, at least historically, there's been more access to high quality higher education that you could then get on campus, and whether it's undergraduate or graduate level, and that would be where you would get a lot of your skill development, and then you would use a platform like Coursera as a supplement. Depending on where you are globally, that may not always be the case. In some cases, a platform like Coursera will really be more of a primary platform to get access to this type of content. So I think some of the trends you see in here are more reflective of how people are using Coursera, not necessarily how people are thinking about skill development more broadly. But you could imagine if LinkedIn Learning and 2U and a few other platforms contributed their data into some kind of meta-analysis, then you're really talking. So I think this sort of scratches the surface of where we may wind up getting to in the next few years. But there's really interesting data, I think, to dig into here.
Yeah, and absolutely. And a couple of points to just add on to yours. One, I do think it would be super exciting, and so you guys heard it here first. super excited if like LinkedIn and Coursera and other companies did get together and merge their data, not even LinkedIn Learning, but the coupling of like skills that the companies are searching for and skills that students are searching for, and the marrying of that information is good for society. And like there's like what's good for society is ultimately good for Coursera and LinkedIn and all and 2U and all these other companies. So I think it's important that they start putting those things together. The second thing, there are a lot of graphs that they added this year that are really trying to show why skills are important. And I think that is key, right? Because again, what we know for sure is this is going to become more important. Dr. Swanee, and we're talking about this with him a couple of years, right? Like to get an MBA is no longer relevant. You're going to continue in learning. It's going to be important as technology increases the exponential rate of change. Humans are going to have to change and evolve. And I think that is what Coursera is tapping into right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because it you know, both your points I think are interesting. On the first hand, you know, how do we establish standards for what these skills are and how you get certified for them? Like, is a Coursera certification the same as passing a LinkedIn test or attending a university? Who knows? And then, and are they going to be described in a consistent way? You know, how do you present a real balanced scorecard around those skills? I think is a really interesting question. I know when I've talked to folks, particularly in emerging fields like cybersecurity or data science, frequently you hear that it's a bit of a wild west in terms of even defining the skills that were, to your point, really relevant a year or two ago, suddenly become framed in a completely different way or become obsolete. So understanding how those standards are established and are measured and maintained is something definitely to keep an eye on. And then the other point is staying hireable and job ready is no longer tied to the front end of your life, meaning the years that matter most. You go away for 4 years, you get all the skills you need, everything else afterwards is on the job training. We're all beginning to question that framework. COVID may even be pushing us further in that direction because now, unlike in previous years, the predominance of our education is going to be delivered online through similar platforms and capabilities. So what used to be something that was maybe more of a big deal globally, people would go to a Coursera or go to a MOOC to get their education. Now, effectively, pretty much all education is some format of online, whether it's a MOOC or a SPOC. And what's interesting about that is, you know, you can measure globally what everyone is doing, and it's nice to see a little bit of the data coming here from Coursera. The other thing that's nice is they give us a tiny little executive summary. I like executive summaries because I like feeling like an executive. And when they say there's an executive summary, when I'm reading it, I like to kick my feet up. You know, I like to maybe, you know, get a snifter of brandy going. You know, I like to feel like a captain of industry. So what did you see in the executive summary here that jumped out at you? It's nice also because they bold their takeaway points, you know?
They do. They bold a lot of their takeaway points. You know, they again, going back to what they're tying it to and one of the first points, right? They're seeing a correlation between the skills and people who are more technology forward and companies and industries that are more technology forward and people who are more resilient to the COVID crisis and companies that are more resilient. And that makes a ton of sense, right? Companies who are tied up with technology and that is their bread and butter will likely survive this better. Just like education companies that were already more online, like Coursera, will likely do better in this economy. And they've been very honest about that too, right? I don't know if you saw this, they just got a massive amount of funding and a valuation of $2.5 billion within this COVID crisis, partly because in this crisis, their scale has grown exponentially, right? As universities look for help to do this and students look for a way to train up in this time. Coursera was very well suited to do this. And so I expect that you're going to see this more and more. And that was one of the points they brought out on their executive summary as well.
Yeah, they also were saying that of the 200 million higher education students whose studies have been disrupted by COVID-19, 80% are located in countries with emerging or lagging skills. And this gets back to the point you were making, and it's something we've been making frequently on the show, is that it is becoming a story of the haves and the have-nots. So in the case of the impact of COVID, it is most profound to really the emerging or lagging skills part of the global index that they're looking at. So the flip side is also true, where so the students who are in countries that are less disrupted by COVID are more likely in the more advanced parts of the skill ecosystem. So I thought that was interesting to begin with. And then to your point, I think the more highly skilled talent, especially those who have technology skills and others, they see those companies that have more technically skilled workforces, see higher stock returns, see less disruption due to COVID. They're more resilient. And then the other point that they make is the idea of income inequality.
Yeah.
So that in the most highly skilled workforce who are getting these highly specialized technical skills, data science skills, business skills, they are seeing that those are the societies that have the biggest income inequality. So basically, the haves are those who are able to leverage their position in the quote unquote developed world, focusing on the high yield skills in technology and data science, et cetera. And they're really getting a significant advantage, while those who are lagging behind, I think, are really faced with more profound challenges. You have thoughts on that? Because I know it's something like we've been talking a lot about the access problem, really more through the narrow lens. I think of like in the US, when we talk about, the way education has changed in response to COVID, it's most profound for those who don't have access to digital. I think this reinforces that from a different lens.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. The thought that as you were talking continues to strike a chord for me, and also even in reading this document, is I'm not always in love with their terminology, and I hope they evaluate it. Their categories are for their skills and how they rank people are cutting edge, competitive, emergent, and lagging. I think those terminologies are charged and charged in a weird way. To your other point, which is what I think you wanted me to address, but I want to point that out too. Yes, what we are going to see, and it's a global phenomena, is if internet and technology is required for education, countries, emerging countries in the true sense of the word, emerging countries are going to struggle more with it, because right now the technology, and this is something that I think we've got to crack, the technology right now is geared against even you studying from a computer and having internet access, and that is not something. The access that people have to information in emerging countries right now, if at all, is via cell phones and cellular towers, and that has got to get stronger. So I'm not saying they're never going to emerge from that, but that technology challenge is not being solved in Africa. Right. It's not being solved in other regions of the world, and I think it's going to make it even more and more challenging. For those countries to emerge.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it does remind me of the Mika report in that you could look at that two ways. You could look at it as a challenge and, a way in which the inequities are there. That there's certainly a lot speaking to that in here. But also, if you think about the opportunity to unlock really that half of the market, this is also where in the Mika report, it was, we had just cleared 50% of, penetration across the world in terms of access to the internet. And, that's still surprising to me, honestly. I mean, it's awe-inspiring in a way that we've gotten half the world on board, but we still have 49% to go. And it's going to take more work to get that access opened up in the same way. But it does seem like there is renewed focus on that and new attention to emerging markets, particularly Africa and Asia, because that is where the population growth is anticipated. That is also where there is the most room for development. Same thing in Latin America, it's where in many ways, the challenge that we have in the US, I think, is that we may be in decline from a more of an advanced position. And then the investment capital may be moving elsewhere to try to both level the playing field, but then also tap into these untapped markets rather than trying to compete in the red ocean that is U.S. education. But yeah, I thought it was interesting. What else is jumping out at you?
Yeah, I wanted to add just a little bit to your Mika point there. One, that it's the 80-20 rule, and that's the danger. We all use the 80-20 rule, is that 20% is going to be really hard to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, my worry for even situations like this, when the education becomes much more reliant on technology, which huge proponent of it, is that the 20%, the 10%, the 5%, they're going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm.
And because the infrastructure that's going to be required to
Mm-hmm.
to make it accessible in parts of the world, it's gonna be ridiculous. It's just like water is not easily accessible for everyone yet in the world. Like their
Right.
basic needs aren't.
Yeah.
This is going to also be hard because at some point, like, it becomes cost prohibitive for companies to do it, and governments have to step in, and not all governments think like that.
Yeah, and philanthropy, right? So like there has been a lot of progress. We've talked about on the show in the past. There's a great book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness. Bill Gates recommends it, where like it basically talks about how many of the things that were true about the developing world, the quote unquote developing world, are no longer true, and some diseases, despite COVID, have actually been solved to a large extent. Like the impact of malaria is much less than it used to be. Cholera is also, being reined in as we get better at treating like water purification systems. And there has been an increased focus within philanthropy, and then also through funding of research that targets these, high return on investment in terms of opening up access and resolving some of these gaps. But you're right. I mean, it isn't a pure let the market just play out, because I think it takes folks playing with their head up to say, access to digital is a public health problem, particularly in light of COVID now, where like a lot of the solution design for the pandemic is going to involve tracking of your data and your health records. And I think increasingly that is going to be something that is on the have side of the digital divide. And that's really going to be interesting to watch. How do those inequities emerge, and then how quickly can we collectively respond, and how? I think it'll be an interesting space to evaluate.
Yeah, my closing thought on this is I think it's a good report. I think it's still too much of a report, and I'm looking for more of, and I'm excited. I think they're going to go there, is of the Meeker style report, which is not just about here's the data, which is a lot of what they're talking about, but here's, and not even just the why, but the so what is what I think this report is still missing. And I think that, like, as we get to that conclusion, I think this is going to become a lot more useful, because I do think tracking this information in a long way is going to lead us to, these are the emergent trends in education. This is where the skill gap is going, and that's where the skill gap is and what we need to solve.
Yeah, for sure. And there are fun highlights to talk about in here as well. So any of them jumping out at you? They're nice. They're nice for, like, assuming we could attend a cocktail party. There are nice things that you could say, like, for example, demand for personal development skills like confidence, stress management, and mindfulness has grown by 1,200% among individual learners. And that's a trend that we have talked about. It's nice to see a little harder data, even though there's some sampling challenges. This is only Coursera's population, that they're only representative of people that Coursera has captured in some capacity, but that's an incredible amount of increase, 1,200%. And I think in a lot of ways that is building on a trend that was happening even prior to COVID around a renewed focus on mindfulness and mental health, behavioral health, personal development. But I think it's been significantly accelerated by the profound psychological trauma that pretty much everyone is going through to some extent, and then folks really most directly impacted either by virtue of their own health being impacted, their family, their job. Then there's the civil unrest that has become a global phenomenon. All of that is causing so much noise and trauma. It's building on some of the psychological danger zone activity that we've seen around social media that's been, and smartphones, that's been emerging over the last 10 years anyway. And this is in part a response that you're seeing on the learner side to say, I'm seeking out this type of content. I think that's informative to anyone who's developing content these days too. There's a real hunger for the social emotional content, the behavioral health stuff. And even if you're doing a curriculum or you're developing skills that are more concrete and targeted, maybe more technical, there is a related trend that isn't necessarily on the same dimension that is saying learners really want to treat their whole selves and they want to really seek out mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah, it's a valid trend. The other one that is striking to me, or the other thing that stands out to me, is where the United States falls on a lot of the rankings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they touch about this a little bit in their North America section, but not a lot. The immigration policies that we have in place right now are stifling innovation and skill development. And also, we still lag behind in industries in actually using technology. We're afraid to automate a lot of the work we have, right? And so a lot of the jobs and tasks that we have aren't automated and aren't using technology as much or AI as a lot of countries. And I think that is very telling and ultimately going to be our downfall. And I have to imagine that also has a lot to do with the policies that we set at the local government and federal government levels.
Yep. Yeah. So. Agreed. So we talked about direct positive correlation between stock performance and skill proficiency. The countries with more equal access to the internet are also those with higher skill proficiencies. So the haves are developing the skills. We talked about the inverse relationship to income inequality and skill proficiency, so that the parts of the world that are developing the most coveted skills and have the most access to the internet are performing well for those who can perform those skills, but it's still a relatively small segment, and it's causing that income inequality. GDP per capita growth is tied to skill proficiency, as is labor force participation. So a pretty strong argument across the board for an increased focus on skill development, skill proficiencies, and then the skill taxonomy that they outline also sort of highlights a certain profile, which is really skewed towards business, technology, and data science. So any thoughts in terms of that second aspect, in terms of the skills themselves? Is this surprising?
Yeah, they rank higher level trends like business, data science, and technology as the three things to talk about. But under those four buckets, health is the next thing people are most studying right now. And that's, given the COVID crisis, that's the one. You've heard me talk about it before. I will continue to push it. Health, education, healthcare, and education in that place is the next hot about the area, and how we get better at it. So because everyone, it's the hero complex, everyone's going to want to solve this problem.
Right.
And it's a problem that requires solving. And so I would need more of that in this report as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. And then the list of the skills that they provided a little more detail on in terms of education trends, I'll just run through them quickly because there are some buzzwords, and I think many of them, if we haven't talked about previously on the show, we should probably skew more in this direction, because I think they do paint an interesting picture of the new economy skills. So they're blockchain, cloud computing, cybersecurity, data storytelling, which I actually liked that turn of phrase because it is an interesting aspect to data science. It's more of a narrative aspect to data science, which I think is really interesting. Deep learning, digital marketing, natural language processing, project management, Python, SQL, TensorFlow, user experience design, and web development. So I think if you look at those roles and those education trends together, they do paint a picture of a very practical skill set that can be immediately applied to tangible work. So there's not as much here about critical thinking skills or about the ability to work creatively or collaboratively with others, which are other trends that we have tracked more broadly. But I think when you think about using a platform like Coursera, which is a little bit more transactional, where it's like the way people talk about using YouTube, where I go to YouTube to get a video that tells me exactly how to do something. This is a level up from that, but not too far, where, you know, a direct path towards greater earning potential for me or towards greater impact to my organization or greater options in terms of where I may get a job, that's going to be tied to many of these more new and emerging digital skills and less about sort of the core, you know, reading, writing, arithmetic, liberal arts, etc. Like those skills, I think are certainly not getting the love from Coursera's users.
But this is my challenge, right? It's the chicken or the egg syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
One, it's such a buzz right now to like these skills that are there. These are the things that are in the world, and so there's probably some reality that these are the things that people like companies are looking for. But what this is not doing, it is a lagging indicator. It is not spotting the trend. Mm-hmm. And I think the more important thing to do and be able to do is spot the trend. And I do think LinkedIn is sitting on the data is going to be much more relevant in that respect, right? And so getting some access to what are companies searching for, or Coursera even talking to more companies and getting their perspective on it, I think it is missing. Because it doesn't surprise me. If you go to Coursera, they also push a lot of their data and technology courses.
Right.
So
yeah, and
or Microsoft Excel, which by the way is still one of the number one skills that people are looking for, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah. I think what would be really interesting to me would be to break this down to different segments of the market that they're talking about, because like they're basically they're painting everything as one massive audience, and I think the reality is we have different pockets, different modes within this broader distribution, where right now there are folks who need to get across the digital divide. There's this concept of digital readiness, and you know, if you were in the service economy and now you need to reskill to understand how you're going to have some resilience and be able to get on board the digital train, maybe that's someone who might need to learn Excel or might need to learn some of the basics, and a platform like Coursera will provide that to you. I don't think that's really the focus of this report. This report is more basic competencies are already accounted for or just are part of the noise in the data. And then the folks who are really leveraging a platform like Coursera to the fullest are those who are seeking real, hard, technical, relevant skills that will make them immediately more employable. And I also think this, because Coursera, to your point, is not just individuals, it's also organizations are subscribing to Coursera for their workforce. Even some forward-thinking universities are opening up access for their students. So I do think this is a good perspective on the haves and folks who are trying to get to that really resilient, higher end, you know, honestly on the right side of income inequality, if there is such a thing. That's what this is for. What it's not really talking about is how do you get folks who aren't ready to enter that conversation, you know, A, the digital access that they need, including the mental readiness to get their learning out of digital, and then B, the right path for them, which may not, you know, if you don't know how to use Excel, you may not want to jump right into the blockchain or cloud computing. So it'd be interesting to understand more of like a hierarchy of skills where you can figure out what does everyone need as sort of a base level of competency in this sort of new world that we're emerging into. And then on top of that base set of competencies, what are your options around specialization? And then what are the paths to, you know, skill certification and sort of coherent collections of skills? Because it still feels a little more atomic, perhaps, in terms of, you know, I'm just going to get the skill that I need without necessarily understanding how multiple skills need to cohere together for an applicant to actually be able to advance in her career.
Yeah, and I don't think any of the modern digital education companies are doing that right now
Right.
particularly well. People like to talk about credentialing and stuff like that. I don't even think it's that. I think it's if I want to know about blockchain, for example, to use your example, like what do I study first? I remember when I was trying to figure out what blockchain was, like just reading what blockchain is, it does
Mhm.
not okay, got it. And like
Yeah.
you almost have to have a base understanding of other skills
Yeah.
before you can grasp that, and it's actually bringing people there. The thing that I like, just one last point I'll make, the thing that they do have in this document that we should call out, we didn't talk a lot about it, but it is there and it is helpful, is for people who are thinking of what industries to go into and what industries, what are the skills that these industries are searching for.
Hmm. Hmm.
Again and again, they do. I'll point out one: health, in the healthcare industry, technology, and it's not surprising that it's there, but
Hmm.
I was like, that is a huge opportunity. Technology, their use of technology and data science is ranked like 9 and 7th,
Hmm.
respectively. And
Hmm.
think about how much value technology and data can bring to the healthcare industry
Yeah.
if used correctly. And the reason isn't because there's so many laws around, and rightfully so. I do not want my medical data exposed, but like the value of like using bringing data into that space is there's an opportunity there, and that's what, like, as you start digging through these things, you can start to see where companies need to go.
Yeah, for sure. Lots to dig into.
Yeah.
Maybe with your snifter of brandy, while perusing the executive
Yep.
summary, you could identify the right career path for yourself or the right opportunity to develop some learning materials or help folks navigate some of this complexity. The last thought I had too is like it's very much a maker's world, and that is
Yes.
something that comes through very clearly here. The skills that are outlined are almost all tied to shipping usable products, actual deliverables, not sort of
Yeah.
abstract concepts or mindsets or competencies. It's more, can you use these skills to create work products? And I think that's a trend that we've seen for quite some time, and increasingly those products are going to be informed by digital, informed by data, informed by AI. So it does seem like there's a new emerging canon of digital skills that all of us are going to need to learn to navigate. And in addition to your request for a broader mapping of skills, I think there's also a related request for understanding how these skills interrelate and how some are foundational for the development of others. Because I think that's the piece that's also missing for me. What do you
Yeah.
need to get real value out of data storytelling? Like what are the prerequisites for their top
Yeah.
emerging skills? What do you need to even be able to engage about the blockchain? There's blockchain for managers, and then there's blockchain for developers and for people who are actually making these things. Really interesting stuff, though, I think, on the skill development side. And we definitely would love to hear from our listeners. We'll keep our eyes open too, like where else should we look? If LinkedIn Learning is releasing stuff, we'd love to see that. But any final thoughts, Melissa, as we're wrapping up here?
I'm looking forward to seeing where this report goes in the future, because it's very easy to pick on something that's just 2 years into its infancy. I think this is important. It's going to be very necessary. So I'm excited to see how they evolve it over the time. And I will continue to put a plug out there that should someone from Coursera want to come on and talk about it, it would be an interesting conversation, because I'm sure they have the insight
Mm-hmm.
behind what we're looking for behind the data.
Yeah, so plenty more to chew on here. Coursera also has webinars out there where they're
Yeah.
breaking this data down. It is the year of the webinar, so get in there and do what you can, and hopefully you were able to keep up with us. If you have any insights or thoughts about what you're reading, what you're learning, hit us up on @trendingined on Twitter, or Trending in Education on LinkedIn. Also, if you like what you're listening to, share it with a friend, write a review, follow us on our social properties. We definitely appreciate it, and we'll be back again soon on Trending in Education.